The first time I saw Maya Sinclair fail the basic telekinetic assessment, I genuinely thought she was joking. I mean, seriously. A species that claims to have conquered faster-than-light travel, and this particular specimen couldn't even lift a simple crystalloid cube. The testing chamber fell silent, as my tentacles twitched with what you humans might call amusement. Fascinating, I muttered, adjusting my optical sensors to get a better look at this bizarre creature. The human appears to be completely ordinary. My colleague, Vortex Prime Caneth, clicked his mandibles in what I recognized as barely contained laughter. Zorith, perhaps the translation matrix is malfunctioning. Surely this cannot be the same species that allegedly defeated the hegemony fleet at Proxima 7. But there she sat, this unremarkable biped with brown hair and those peculiar little dots across her nose, staring at the cube with the most determined expression I had ever witnessed. Her breathing grew heavy. Her face flushed that strange reddish color humans turn when exerting themselves, and still, nothing. The cube remained exactly where we had placed it. Perhaps, I suggested with what I considered tremendous diplomatic restraint, the human would prefer to attempt the strength evaluation instead. Maya Sinclair looked up at me with those bizarrely expressive eyes and said something that would haunt my dreams for cycles to come. Actually, I'd like to try the intelligence test. Oh, sweet void of space. The intelligence test. Now understand something about the Galactic Council's standardized evaluations. They were designed by the finest minds across 17 different species, each contributing their unique cognitive advantages. The Zephyrians provided mathematical reasoning. The Nithians contributed spatial awareness. The Vortakians added tactical analysis, and so on. The test had a failure rate of approximately 0.3% among sentient species. Maya Sinclair scored -7, not 7. -7. I had to recalibrate my assessment algorithms 3 times, because I refused to believe the results. How does one achieve negative points on an intelligence evaluation? The scoring system wasn't even designed to accommodate such a catastrophic failure. Perhaps, Kyneth whispered, his voice dripping with what I now recognize as poorly conveyed horror. We should recommend immediate quarantine protocols. But Maya was already standing up, brushing imaginary dust from her peculiar fabric coverings, and smiling. Actually, smiling, as if failing every conceivable metric of galactic civilization was somehow acceptable. So, she said with that insufferable human optimism, when do I start my assignment? Assignment? Assignment! This creature couldn't pass a basic cognitive function test, demonstrated 0 psychic abilities, and possessed the physical prowess of a malnourished gossamer slug. And she wanted an assignment. Miss Sinclair, I began, activating my most patient diplomatic subroutines. Perhaps you misunderstand the purpose of these evaluations. They determine your placement within the Galactic Defense Network based on your natural capabilities. Oh, I understand perfectly, she interrupted. Actually interrupted me. A council assessor 3rd class. You are trying to figure out what I'm good at. The thing is, your tests are measuring the wrong things. The wrong thing? These assessments had been refined over 3,000 standard years, tested on billions of beings across the galaxy, and validated by the greatest scientific minds in known space. But apparently, this failed biped had identified fundamental flaws in our methodology within the span of 2 hours. Kyneth's optical stalks swiveled toward me in what I interpreted as a silent plea for guidance. What does one do with a being so thoroughly convinced of their own competence despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary? Very well, I decided. Perhaps you would enlighten us as to what these tests should be measuring instead. Maya's expression shifted then, and for just a moment, I glimpsed something that made my defensive instincts activate. There was an intelligence behind those eyes, but it was different, alien, even by our standards. Sharp in ways that our instruments couldn't quantify. Show me the enemy, she said simply. The enemy? We hadn't mentioned any enemy. The hegemony war had ended 3 cycles ago, and while there were always minor territorial disputes and resource conflicts, nothing that required Oh, you are referring to the Void Walkers, I said slowly. Her smile widened, and I experienced what humans call a chill down my spine, despite lacking anything resembling a spine. The things that your best psychics can't detect, your strongest warriors can't fight, and your smartest tacticians can't predict. She leaned forward slightly. Yo, those enemies. Now, here's where things became genuinely terrifying. The Void Walkers were classified at the highest security levels. Information about them was restricted to council members, senior military commanders, and a select few researchers. There was absolutely no way a human civilian should have known they existed, let alone understood their capabilities with such precision. How do you? I began. Because they have been studying us too, Maya interrupted again. And unlike you, they understand that human abilities don't show up on your pretty little tests. Kenneth's breathing apparatus began making that whistling sound that indicated severe anxiety. Zorith, we should contact Security Division immediately. This could be a breach. No, Maya said, and her voice carried an authority that made my combat protocols momentarily confused about who was actually in charge of this conversation. You should contact whoever makes the big decisions around here, because I'm about to solve your Void Walker problem. The absolute audacity of this creature, while it was almost refreshing, in a way that made me want to both laugh and activate emergency containment procedures simultaneously. Miss Sinclair, I said, with all due respect, you scored -7 on our intelligence assessment. You demonstrated 0 psychic capacity. Your physical capabilities are below average even for your own species. What exactly makes you believe you can address a threat that has stymied our greatest minds for over a decade? She stood up then, and despite being barely half my height, somehow managed to look down at me. Because, Assessor Zorith, your greatest minds are trying to fight the Void Walkers using the same abilities that make them predictable in the first place. Meaning, they are not looking for psychic signatures, because humans don't have psychic signatures. They are not preparing for super strength, because we are not super strong. They are not analyzing our tactical patterns, because we don't follow logical tactical patterns. I felt my cognitive processes struggling to keep up. You are suggesting that your species' apparent limitations are actually advantages. Maya's grin was becoming genuinely unsettling. See, here's what your fancy tests missed. Humans don't just think outside the box. We don't even acknowledge that boxes exist. Before I could respond, the emergency alerts began sounding throughout the facility. Red warning lights bathed the assessment chamber as my communication implant crackled to life with reports I could barely process. Void Walker incursion, multiple breach points, primary defensive systems compromised. And in the middle of this chaos, Maya Sinclair began laughing. Right on schedule, she said, as if interdimensional nightmares materializing throughout our most secure facility was somehow expected. I was wondering when they'd make their move. What are you talking about? I demanded, my voice climbing several octaves, as I watched security feeds showing our most elite defenders being systematically overwhelmed by entities that barely registered on our sensors. They have been monitoring your assessment protocols for months, Maya explained with maddening calm as explosions echoed through the corridors. Learning how you categorize threats, studying your response patterns, mapping your defensive capabilities. That's impossible. Your security is designed to stop beings who think like you do. She was already moving toward the exit, and I found myself following despite every rational instinct screaming at me to head in the opposite direction. The Void Walkers have been using your own strengths against you. As we emerged into the main corridor, I witnessed something that would fundamentally alter my understanding of tactical combat. Maya Sinclair walked directly toward a group of Void Walkers that had just materialized through the reinforced walls. And instead of fleeing or fighting, she did something so unexpected that even these interdimensional predators seemed momentarily confused. She waved at them. "Hi there," she called out cheerfully. "I'm Maya. I have been waiting to meet you." The Void Walkers, beings of shadow and malevolent energy that had terrorized our galaxy for cycles, actually paused. Their assault on our security forces momentarily ceased, as they focused their attention on this small, apparently defenseless human who was treating a combat situation like a social gathering. "This is either brilliant or suicidal," Kenneth whispered from somewhere behind me. "With humans," I replied, finally beginning to understand. Those might be the same thing. What happened next defied every military doctrine, scientific principle, and rational expectation I had ever encountered. Maya began talking to the Void Walkers, not communicating through the complex psychic interfaces that advanced species use for first contact, not attempting to establish linguistic protocols, just talking, like she was explaining something to particularly slow children. "See? The thing is," she said, walking slowly toward creatures that existed partially outside our dimensional framework, "you have been approaching this all wrong. You are trying to conquer us, the same way you conquered everyone else, but humans don't work that way." One of the Void Walkers extended what might have been an appendage in her direction, energy crackling around it in patterns that usually preceded the complete dissolution of organic matter. Maya didn't even flinch. "You feed on fear, right? That's your whole thing. You appear, everyone panics, their psychic defenses collapse, and you drain their life force through terror." She nodded, as if confirming a simple mathematical equation. "Pretty efficient system. Must work great on most species." The appendage stopped just short of contact, and I could sense confusion radiating from the entity. This was not how prey was supposed to behave. "But here's what you missed in all your research," Maya continued, her voice taking on an almost educational tone. "Humans don't just experience fear. We get angry at it." And then she did something that will be recorded in xenobiology textbooks for generations to come, assuming we survived the next few minutes to write any textbooks. Maya Sinclair reached out and grabbed the Void Walker's energy appendage with her bare hand. The creature recoiled as if struck, its form flickering between dimensions in what I could only describe as shock. Energy that should have killed her instantly seemed to bounce off, dissipate. I couldn't understand what I was witnessing. "You see," Maya said, still holding on to an interdimensional nightmare like she was shaking hands at a business meeting. "Your species has this really interesting vulnerability. You have spent so long feeding on predictable fear responses that you have never learned to handle someone who treats you like just another Tuesday." The Void Walker attempted to withdraw, but Maya's grip tightened. Somehow, impossibly, a being that existed partially outside our reality was being physically restrained by a human female who had failed every standard assessment of capability. "Now," she said, her tone shifting to something that made my combat systems fully activate, "let's discuss the terms of your immediate departure from this facility." That's when I realized that Maya Sinclair hadn't failed our tests. She had made our tests irrelevant. The Void Walker she was holding began to emit sounds that our universal translators couldn't process, fluctuating between frequencies that suggested either communication attempts or expressions of distress. The other entities in the corridor had stopped their attack entirely, their attention focused on this unprecedented interaction. I know, Maya said sympathetically. "This is probably really confusing for you. You show up expecting to harvest some delicious terror, and instead you get a species that watches horror movies for entertainment." She paused thoughtfully. "Actually, that explains a lot about your strategic miscalculations." Strategic miscalculation. This creature was discussing interdimensional warfare theory, while physically restraining a being that our best scientists couldn't even properly scan. "The thing about humans," Maya continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the corridor, addressing both the Void Walkers and those of us witnessing this impossible scene, "is that we have this really annoying habit of turning our weaknesses into weapons." She released the Void Walker, which immediately retreated several meters, its form stabilizing as if distance provided some form of safety. "You want to know why I scored -7 on your intelligence test?" Maya asked, glancing back at me with that unsettling smile. "Because I was using the time to hack your evaluation systems and access your classified databases. My processing cores nearly overloaded." "You... what?" "Oh, come on, Assessor Zorith. Did you really think I was just sitting there struggling with basic problems? I mean, seriously. A telekinetic assessment that measures psychic manipulation of matter." She laughed, and the sound echoed strangely off the walls. That's not testing intelligence. That's testing whether someone has the same abilities you expect them to have. The implications hit me like a meteor strike. If she had accessed our systems during the assessment, she had seen everything: security protocols, defensive measures, classified threat analyses, strategic responses to the Voidwalker incursions. Everything. While you were measuring my complete inability to lift objects with my mind, Maya continued, I was learning about these guys, your previous encounters with them, and why all your conventional approaches have failed so spectacularly. She turned back to the Voidwalkers, who were maintaining their distance but hadn't retreated further. Their forms seemed less stable now, flickering between states of existence in ways that suggested uncertainty. Here's the deal, she announced, her voice carrying an authority that made space itself seem to pay attention. You are going to cease all hostile activities in this sector, return to whatever dimensional space you came from, and seriously reconsider your expansion strategy. The largest of the Voidwalkers pulsed with what our sensors registered as aggressive intent, but Maya just shook her head. No, no, no. You are not thinking this through. She began counting on her fingers. First, you have just discovered that your primary weapon, fear, doesn't work on humans the way you expected. Second, if one untrained human civilian can physically interact with your energy forms, what do you think our military specialists might be capable of once they understand the principles involved? I watched as the implications of her words seemed to register with the entity. Their forms began shifting more rapidly, suggesting increased agitation or concern. Third, Maya continued with ruthless cheerfulness, I have now demonstrated that human unpredictability isn't a weakness. It's a tactical advantage you can't counter because you can't predict it. She paused, letting that sink in. And fourth, most importantly, you have just given humanity a really good reason to get genuinely angry at you. The silence that followed was profound. Even the facility's emergency alarm seemed muted as everyone, human and alien alike, processed what had just occurred. You see, Maya said, her voice dropping to conversational levels, there's something your research missed about human psychology. We are not just unpredictable when we are scared. We are absolutely terrifying when we are motivated. The Voidwalkers began to withdraw, their forms becoming less defined as they prepared to phase out of our dimensional space. But Maya wasn't finished. Oh, and one more thing, she called after them. Tell whoever sent you that Earth is officially off limits. Not because we are too strong, not because we are too smart, but because we are too stubborn to be conquered by beings who think fear is a substitute for creativity. As the last of the entities faded from our reality, Maya turned back to face me and Kenneth, both of whom were standing in the corridor, with our mouths agape in whatever approximation of shock our species could manage. So, she said brightly, about that assignment. 3 standard hours later, I found myself in the most surreal briefing of my career, watching Maya Sinclair casually redraw the strategic map of our entire galaxy, while munching on something she called a granola bar. The problem with your whole approach, she said, gesturing at the holographic display with what appeared to be a piece of compressed vegetation and nuts, is that you are still thinking like a galactic civilization. Council Prime Nexareth, the most decorated military strategist in known space, flickered his chromatic scales in what I recognized as barely controlled irritation. Sinclair, with respect, thinking like a galactic civilization is precisely what has allowed us to maintain peace and order across 17 sectors for over 2 millennia. Maya paused mid-chew and fixed him with that look. You know the one, I mean now, that peculiar human expression that somehow manages to convey both amusement and pity simultaneously. Right, she said slowly. And how's that working out for you with the Voidwalker situation? The silence in the war room could have been bottled and sold as a sound dampener. Nexareth's scales shifted through several colors I had never seen him display before, none of which suggested positive emotional states. The Voidwalkers, he said with the careful precision of someone trying very hard not to lose their temper, represent an unprecedented threat that operates outside established parameters. They are bullies, Maya interrupted, finishing her snack and dusting crumbs off her hands. Interdimensional bullies with a really effective scare tactic. but bullies nonetheless. I watched as every senior officer in the room struggled to process this casual dismissal of beings that had devastated entire star systems. Chief Science Advisor Quelith's tentacles were actually twitching with what I assumed was academic outrage. "Miss Sinclair," Quelith interjected, his voice modulator set to maximum diplomatic restraint. "These entities exist partially outside our dimensional framework. They manipulate space-time itself as a weapon. They have proven immune to our most advanced military technologies. To characterize them as mere bullies who found a really good trick," Maya finished. "Look, I get it. They are scary. They show up. Reality gets weird. People panic. Everyone dies horribly. But here's the thing about bullies. They only work if you play by their rules." She stood up and walked to the tactical display, her small figure dwarfed by the massive holographic representation of Voidwalker incursion patterns across 3 galactic sectors. "You have been trying to fight them using the same strategies that work against conventional threats: superior firepower, better shields, faster ships, smarter tactics." She waved her hand through the display, causing the light patterns to ripple around her fingers. "But the Voidwalkers don't care about any of that stuff, because they are not playing the same game you are." "Then, what game are they playing?" I asked, genuinely curious despite myself. Maya's grin was becoming familiar, and it still made my defensive systems want to activate. "Psychology. They are running the galaxy's most effective fear-based psychological warfare campaign." She manipulated the display controls with surprising competence, highlighting specific patterns in the attack data. "Look at this. Every single incursion follows the same pattern. They appear, cause maximum terror, drain life force from panicked populations, then disappear before organized resistance can form." "Yes," Nexareth said impatiently. "We are aware of their tactical preferences. That's precisely why they have been so difficult to count." "No, you are missing the point." Maya isolated several data clusters, showing them in stark relief against the star field. They don't attack military installations first. They don't go for strategic targets. They always hit civilian populations where the fear response will be strongest. Obviously, terror is their primary weapon, so they target areas where they can feed. Maya completed. They are not trying to conquer territory. They are not establishing strategic positions. They are farming. The implications hit me like a systems failure cascade. Farming? Think about it. Show up, terrorize the locals, harvest the fear energy, move on to the next target. They are not invaders. They are, what's a good analogy? She snapped her fingers. They are like cosmic cattle ranchers, and you have all been acting like prize livestock. The war room fell silent except for the hum of processing systems working overtime, as some of the galaxy's finest military minds grappled with this perspective shift. "Even if your analysis is correct," Nexareth said carefully, "it doesn't change the fundamental problem. They remain immune to our weapons, undetectable by our sensors, and capable of manipulating reality in ways that scare you," Maya interrupted. "Which brings us to the solution." Chief Science Advisor Quelith's optical stalks swiveled toward her with predatory focus. "You have a solution?" "I have 12 solutions," Maya said casually, "plus 3 backup plans, and a really entertaining contingency option that involves reprogramming their dimensional anchors to create recursive feedback loops." I felt my processing cores strain under the weight of trying to parse that sentence. "You have developed 12 separate strategies to counter the Voidwalkers in the span of 3 hours. Well, technically I developed them during your assessment process yesterday, but I have spent the last 3 hours refining the implementation details." She manipulated the display again, and suddenly the tactical overview was overlaid with complex mathematical models that made my analytical subroutines ache just looking at them. "Miss Sinclair?" Quelith began, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone addressing a potentially dangerous mental patient. "These calculations appear to incorporate principles of dimensional physics that require advanced degrees in at least 7 separate scientific disciplines to understand properly." "Yeah." Maya nodded cheerfully. Good thing humans don't need to understand something properly to figure out how to break it. She highlighted a specific section of her analysis, and I realized I was looking at something that violated several fundamental laws of physics while somehow remaining mathematically sound. See, this is what I was talking about with the box thing, Maya continued. You look at the void walkers and see beings that exist partially outside reality, manipulate dimensional barriers, and possess incomprehensible powers. All of which is true, but also completely irrelevant. How is any of that irrelevant? I demanded. Because they are still bound by the basic rules of energy conservation. Her expression shifted to something approaching academic excitement. They have to exist somewhere, even if that somewhere is outside our normal dimensional framework. They have to expend energy to maintain their coherence across dimensional boundaries. And most importantly, they have to interact with our reality in predictable ways to affect it. She gestured at the display, highlighting energy signature patterns that our sensors had recorded during Void Walker encounters. Every time they manifest in our dimension, they create detectable distortions. Every time they manipulate matter or energy, they leave quantum fingerprints. Every time they drain life force, they establish measurable connection protocols. We have analyzed all of that data extensively, Nexareth protested. Our best scientists have spent cycles trying to develop countermeasures based on those signatures, with minimal success. Because you were trying to fight them on their terms, Maya said. You were looking for ways to block their attacks, deflect their energy manipulation, resist their dimensional intrusion techniques. Which seems like a logical approach, I observed. If you are thinking like a galactic civilization, sure. Maya's grin widened. But humans don't think like a galactic civilization. She activated a new section of the display, showing what appeared to be a weapon system designed that incorporated elements I couldn't immediately identify. This is a psychological resonance disruptor, she announced proudly. It doesn't try to block Void Walker attacks. Instead, it broadcasts human emotional patterns directly into their dimensional substrate. The silence in the room stretched long enough for me to run 3 complete diagnostic cycles on my audio processors. You want to broadcast human emotions at interdimensional entities? Quelith's voice had climbed several octaves. Not just any emotions, Maya clarified, specifically the emotional response patterns that humans exhibit when we encounter something we find genuinely annoying. I felt my cognitive processes grinding to a halt. Annoying? Think about it. The Void Walkers have spent eons feeding on fear, terror, despair, and other high-energy negative emotions. Their entire physiology is adapted to process and derive sustenance from those specific psychological states. Maya manipulated the display to show theoretical energy flow patterns. But what happens when you expose a fear-based predator to the emotional equivalent of persistent mild irritation? That's, Nexareth began, then stopped, his scales cycling through colors I had never seen before. That's completely insane, I finished. That's completely human, Maya corrected. And it gets better. The psychological resonance disruptor is just the opening move. She activated another section of her presentation, revealing a tactical deployment strategy that made my security protocols scream warnings about dimensional stability violation. Phase 2 involves using their own dimensional manipulation abilities against them by creating what I like to call irreality anchors. Reality anchors? Quelith leaned forward, his scientific curiosity apparently overriding his growing alarm. Localized distortions in space-time that force interdimensional entities to maintain full coherence in our reality. Maya's explanation was accompanied by mathematical proofs that hurt to look at directly. Basically, we trap them in our dimension, where they can't use their phasing abilities to avoid conventional attacks. The energy requirements alone would be, Quelith began calculating, then stopped, his optical stalks focusing on specific equations in Maya's display. Wait, this can't be right. According to your calculations, the power source for these reality anchors would be the Void Walkers themselves, Maya confirmed. We are using their own dimensional manipulation to power the systems that trap them in our reality. It's like using someone's own strength to pin them in a wrestling match. I was beginning to understand why Maya had failed all our standard assessments. She wasn't operating within any framework we had ever encountered. She was rewriting the rules of engagement while the game was in progress. Phase 3, Maya continued, clearly enjoying the expressions of barely controlled panic on everyone's faces, involves psychological warfare tactics specifically designed to exploit the fact that Void Walkers have never encountered a species that treats existential threats as engineering challenges. She manipulated the display again, showing deployment patterns for what appeared to be. I couldn't even process what I was looking at. Are those disco balls? I asked weakly. Multi-dimensional strobe pattern generators, Maya corrected, designed to create visual and auditory stimulation patterns that human brains find mildly entertaining, but that should cause severe disorientation in entities adapted to feeding on fear and despair. You want to defeat interdimensional nightmares with dance music. Nexareth's voice had dropped to a whisper. I want to defeat interdimensional nightmares by forcing them to experience the emotional equivalent of being stuck in an elevator with someone who won't stop talking about their pet cat. Maya's grin was now genuinely terrifying. Except the elevator is our entire dimensional space, and they can't leave until they agree to stop harvesting sentient beings for food. The war room had descended into the then of silence usually reserved for moments when everyone realizes they are either witnessing genius or complete madness, and nobody can tell which. There's more, Maya added cheerfully. More, I managed. Oh, this is just the defensive strategy. I also developed an offensive protocol for tracking Voidwalkers back to their home dimension, and introducing them to some uniquely human concepts like persistent customer service calls and multi-level marketing presentation. Chief Science Advisor Quelith made a sound that his voice modulator couldn't properly process. Miss Sinclair, what you are describing isn't just warfare. It's treating them like the interdimensional bullies they are instead of the cosmic horrors you have built them up to be in your heads. Maya finished. Look, I get it. They are scary. They have been winning by making you too afraid to think clearly. But fear is just another emotion, and emotions can be managed. She walked back to the central display, her small figure somehow commanding the attention of every being in the room. The thing about humans is that we have spent our entire evolutionary history dealing with things that could kill us easily. We are not the strongest, fastest, smartest, or most psychically gifted species in the galaxy, but we are absolutely the most stubborn. Stubborn? I asked. When something tries to scare us, our first instinct isn't to run or hide. It's to figure out how to make it stop being scary. Maya's expression grew serious for the first time. The Voidwalkers made one critical error in their assessment of human psychology, which was, they assumed that because we don't have traditional galactic abilities, we don't have effective responses to threats. Maya's smile returned, but now it carried an edge that made me understand why predators throughout human evolutionary history had learned to be wary of this species. What they didn't account for is that humans don't need superpowers to be dangerous. We just need to be sufficiently motivated. She activated the final section of her presentation, revealing a timeline that made my temporal processing systems struggle to keep up. Implementation begins in 6 hours. Full deployment across all affected sectors within 48 hours. Voidwalker incursions should cease entirely within 1 standard week. 1 week? Nexareth's scales had settled into a color pattern I had never seen before. Miss Sinclair, with all due respect, the Voidwalker threat has persisted for over a decade. The idea that it can be resolved in 1 week, using human stubbornness and interdimensional echo balls, Maya suggested helpfully. This is either the most brilliant strategic innovation in galactic history, I said slowly, or the most elaborate practical joke ever conceived. Maya Sinclair, the human who had scored -7 on our intelligence assessment, looked around the war room at the assembled representatives of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, and shrugged. With humans, she said, those are often the same thing. 47 hours later, I received the first reports of Voidwalker withdrawal from contested sectors. The entities were retreating not because they had been defeated in conventional battle, but because they were apparently finding human-controlled space to be, and I quote from the official intelligence report, insufficiently conducive to productive fear-harvesting operations. Maya Sinclair had been right. She hadn't just redefined power, she had redefined the entire concept of what it meant to be dangerous. And the most terrifying part, she was still just getting started. As I submitted my final assessment report to the Galactic Council, recommending immediate revision of all standard evaluation protocols and the establishment of a new category for non-standard strategic thinking, I realized something that would change my understanding of the universe forever. Maya Sinclair hadn't failed our tests because she was incapable of meeting galactic standards. She had failed them because galactic standards were incapable of measuring what humans actually were. And what humans actually were, I was beginning to understand, was something the galaxy had never encountered before. A species that treated the impossible as merely inconvenient, and inconvenience as a personal challenge. The Voidwalkers had learned this the hard way. I suspected they wouldn't be the last.